not sure where I left off. Did we get through? We did our land acknowledgement.
Yes.
Yes.
And
excellent.
And I just welcomed the group to make sure that they felt comfortable, that this is a safe space, and if there is anything that we can do to be better welcoming individuals, we would be happy to do so.
Excellent. So let me just, before we jump into our conversations with Sara and Olga, can I do one more acknowledgement? And this is one that I normally do with groups. We haven't done so out of time, but it's more it's a personal acknowledgement and more a statement of fact, and I think it's relevant to today's conversation. So I will be quick with this one. It's a statement that I was born white, male, middle class in Southern Ontario in the 1970s. When you combine that with the fact that I am happily married to my beautiful wife, Melanie, I check every box of privilege there is. And I share that because I'm understanding and hearing loud and clear that my journey to our screens today may have been radically different than many of yours. And doors that open for me just because of the way I look may have in fact closed for you for that exact same reason. Now, I understand that I can never understand what that is like, and nor do I think that I have the emotional or physical strength to even imagine living a life like that. But I want you to know that that doesn't align with my values, my faith, or how I'm trying to build a business or my volunteer career. And I've done my best to help open doors for others and encourage their voices to sing just as loud as mine. So if there are learnings for me today around my privilege, I welcome your feedback and I am grateful for your grace. I share that today because I think that is good grounding for us to think about, well, acknowledgement for me that I'm going to have a very different lens on this conversation than many of you. So with that, he says, looking for his notes, which of course have gone offline. And by the way, we're out of power here in Center Wellington. So Amy, are you out of power as well? Or is it just here in the South End? Anyway, let's move in to our conversations. I'm just thinking back to our agenda. The only other thing I want to do, maybe really quickly, and then I'm going to shut up, is a quick 4 simple words reminder of why I want to make a connection between equity and this idea of service leadership. And I have this passion and belief that service is a joy for everyone. It can be a joy for everyone. And I think this is the tension around that we have from servant leadership that we've chatted about to service leadership, which my hope and my goal with these conversations is that it can be grounded in equity, in inclusion, and in a willingness to work with other people. So that in fact was one of this idea of equity and understanding my role in it and trying to have more conversations around it. In fact, have grounded and driven much of my hope and thinking around service leadership. So just want to plant that seed today that service can be a joy. And when we're doing so in partnership, we've got clarity on what we want from one another. And in fact, I do have that very natural off-ramp to go back and check in on myself, my own needs again. And I can in fact figure out other ways I can be serving. If the golden rule is to treat others the way I want to be treated, I love this idea that the platinum rule is to treat others the way they want to be treated. And I hope that can be a core learning and focus for us as we think about service leadership and today's session. With that, let's introduce our guests. And I unfortunately have lost their full bios, but I do want to welcome and thank Olga Vigil Letang, who is a supervisor of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility for the city of Cambridge, and my good friend Sara Sayyed, who is a senior advisor for equity, anti-racism, and Indigenous Initiatives at the city of Guelph. So thank you. They both come to us with an expansive network and background of learning and knowledge and expertise in this area. And I know we're going to have some great conversations. So how about a round of applause for our two speakers? Thank you, Sara and Olga, for joining us today. And I'm going to figure out a way. I can't see you both yet. So I encourage you to jump in because I'm just on my phone here and can't see either of you, but what a welcome. Thank you for being here. And the first question that I thought we could get our conversations going with, and it's a good one, and you posted it for us, was why this sudden interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion? This is on everyone's minds and hearts these days, quite frankly. So where does this interest come from? So let me open it up to Olga and Sarah for your feedback and comments on that.
Sarah, did you want to take this one first?
Sure, I can go first. Thank you, Kim and Curt, for having us here today, and welcome everybody. I'm going to make just 2 comments before I jump into the question. I'm going to ask Curt not to use the terms lean in anymore, because that in itself comes with a lot of connotations of, I don't know, almost elite, upper class privilege because of the way it's been used previously. So I'm going to start with that and say, let's not lean in, but let's all do what we can within our means and our ability and our capability, because nothing is too small and nothing is too big. And I think we all have something to contribute. And I don't want to put those kind of connotations or barriers or difficulties that people think, oh, I have to lean into this in a certain amount, or I have to commit so much of my time and energy. So I just want to move away from kind of those catchphrases.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
And I think that's part of the importance. I myself bring the lens of, first generation, South Asian, cisgender, married with children, raised for most of my life now in Guelph. And so that brings a very specific lens to the work that I do as well. Just as Curt has outlined his lens, I think it's important for us that even though we're in this field of DEI, that we each bring our lens and lived experience, and we are constantly learning and constantly unlearning because of the experiences we come from, and we cannot possibly really, sometimes it's harder to wrap your head around somebody else's lived experience, and I think that happens for all of us, regardless of what our background is. And I think that's why it's really important, this work, to really I've seen the questions, and this is why I kind of propose this question, is why do we have, these full-time dedicated positions for nonprofits or corporates or the city, and why are we dedicating so much resources to it? But there's a lot of work that has to be done, a lot of unlearning that needs to be done, and it's in places that we wouldn't even think to look. So those systemic barriers that are built in, it's not something that we can continue to do off the side of our desk, because there is a lot of not only the physical work that goes into it, but the emotional labor for many people that goes into it. It can be very hard and a very, some weeks can be more draining and some weeks can be very uplifting based on what's going on and what things or issues that we're dealing with in the moment. And there's a lot of work long term that needs to be done to really restructure systems. And so I think it's really important to understand that there is a need for this when you're looking at positions in nonprofits, or when you're trying to budget those positions and that work, that it's not something, it's very difficult to do it part-time. It's really difficult to do it halfway. It needs to be done in a very intentional way, and it's something that you really need to commit fully to. And so that's why I think it's really important to have these kind of positions, and why it's great to see, whether it's private corporations, nonprofits, municipalities, everybody just kind of getting on that train, so to speak, and saying, yes, we need to commit and make that commitment.
Excellent.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm just going to add on to what she said. And again, thank you all for being here today. I know that time is extremely valuable. So the fact that you chose to spend your time with us to learn about this is definitely an example of dedication for this type of work. And so I thank you for that. And I'm sure your staff and your teams thank you for that, as well as in hoping that you're bringing that back with you to your work. When we talk about, the importance of this right now, we always have to remember that like this type of work has been happening for a long time. We look at 1992, you had Stephen Lewis's report on race relations. 2007, another report from the National Anti-Racism Council of Canada, Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action. Go even back to the 70s, Stonewall riots. We've always had activism and we've always had pressure from the community to say that we need to be doing more. And if you reframe it to look at the work that you're doing, if you are working in a nonprofit, you are dedicated to something right now. Whether you're working with previous incarcerated individuals, whether you're working in homelessness, whether you're working with survivors of domestic violence, you are working in something that has to do with equity. And there was a reason that an organization specific to that work was created, because it's impossible for all of us to be able to say, I'm going to work from a social justice lens and I'm going to address everything. We can't address everything, because there are so many different, facets to equity work. But we do need people to say, okay, I'm going to take on the role of guiding this work, but this work is going to be embedded in everything that we do. So that's, I think, why you start to see a lot more of these positions come about, because you might have a lens when it comes to working with the 2S LGBT community. You might have a lens working with children and youth, but you're not going to be able to see something from every single perspective. So having someone in that role who can try to do some more deep dive research, connect with their colleagues who work in that field, and really continue to challenge you and try to make this work more substantial is really important.
So thank you both for that. And Sarah, thank you for the learning there. I appreciate that very much. Is there, when we think about let me ask, has there been more focus and attention put on this over the past 2 years, for example, even through COVID? I'm wondering, have you seen an amplification of this work? And bold question, is that a good or a bad thing? Like, is it happening? Is there an equation between the interest and then the quality of that work, maybe?
I can go first, Sarah, if that's okay. I think that the reason why a lot of these positions are coming out now is because we're having a lot more support from allies. There are many people who are starting to do exactly what Curt did. What is my privilege? Where do I sit? What am I capable of doing? And what haven't I been doing? And some of these voices are now supporting and amplifying the voices who've been saying it for decades and decades at a time. And there's getting much more social media attention. There's much more attention to the fact that we as a society can be doing more. It's within our capacity. And so I think that's probably why these positions are coming forward, the pressure from the community to say, this is our responsibility to do good. So I think that's part of some of the movement behind that. Also, I think cell phones and having the ability to record some of these injustices as they're happening. We used to live in a world saying that doesn't actually happen to you. There's no way that person touched you in that way, or there's no way that person said that to you, because we live from a lens that I would never do something like that. So why would somebody else? And then seeing it for our own eyes makes us realize, oh, wow, so-and-so has been talking about this. I think your question was, is it doing it justice? I think it's kind of twofold. I think for a lot of people who've been talking about this for years, it's kind of infuriating, because I think there are many activists who are very vocal on social media, and or just in general within their circles and their workplaces, people who've lost their job, who've lost their family, who've been incarcerated, to speaking up about these issues. And now all of a sudden you have other people who may not have the same life experiences as them being loud, and now it's getting attention. And so it's kind of disheartening. But on the other hand, very much what Sarah said, that something needs to happen. And whether you are leaning in fully, whether you are taking it by doing these small actions or little actions or huge actions, we're working towards something. And I think it's, at this point, a good first step.
Thank you. Sarah, your thoughts?
I think Olga covered everything there. I don't really have much more to add to that. But yeah, I think we're finally seeing the acknowledgement. Social media and cell phones and cameras have made a huge difference because we're getting things in real time, things that people, are not, that that people couldn't believe previously, that would that really happen, or you must be exaggerating, you seeing that. And even this last a couple of weeks with the whole freedom convoy in Ottawa, having those live tweets coming out of Ottawa, and seeing what's happening, because people outside of the city are really like, would people really be doing this? But yeah, it's happening. So I think that acknowledgement, that finally things need to be done, people really being able to see it for themselves firsthand. And yeah, it is a bit, for some people, I can imagine that it must be really frustrating that it took this long to happen. But I think we need to at least, take every little bit that we can and keep pushing forward with that. So, I mean, if this is what it took to get here, let's not let all of those actions have happened in vain, and let's continue to push
Right.
forward, and really, out of respect for the people who have struggled and who have suffered,
Right.
let's move forward with this, as and understand the urgency behind this work.
Brilliant. We chatted beforehand. We got some themes. I think, Kim, I'm wondering if we can put out poll question number 2 and get people's feedback, because I think that might lead us into our next conversation. So Kim, if you could release poll question number 2.
Yes, I am confident about leading conversations at our organization.
Yeah, so Kim's got a poll there. Jump in on your thoughts there, and then Sara and Olga, let's just reflect on this feedback, and this may take us to our next theme we wanted to explore, which was this idea of the coin of being afraid and having courage to lean into this work. So we'll give you another minute to fill out that poll. And then Kim, when you've got a number of people in there, we can open it up and have a look at it together.
Great. I will share the screen. There's our results.
So I am confident about leading conversations at our organization about diversity, equity, inclusion. So we've got, look at that. This is fascinating. Okay. So Sara and Olga, we've got a really interesting split, almost 44-44 between agree and disagree. What are your thoughts and reflections on just the temperature of the room there? Is that something that you're seeing in your work?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting that it splits so evenly right down the middle there. But no, I think there is a lot of hesitation, because what I'm seeing right now in my new role is that people are wanting to do the work, are wanting to make actions that are meaningful, and but they're not sure where to start. And so a lot of the comments the first couple of weeks I got was like, I'm so glad you're here, or somebody's been, appointed to this position that we can, now talk to without, without being judged, or with, with a little bit of, hesitation that, how am I doing this right? Am I not doing this right? How do I go about doing it? And wanting to move forward with that. So it is a, I don't want to say tricky, but I think we've always been conditioned to be polite and not discuss things that are too controversial, not rock the boat too much. And so it's a hard conversation starter. And, when you're doing it at work, you're not sure what the response is going to be or the pushback is going to be. So you're not sure if you want to, are you willing to risk your position? Are you willing to risk, the support of people around you or your team, and how people are going to respond? So, I think I think that it does accurately reflect what's going on. Olga?
I can say with all honesty, I regularly feel afraid and scared and lacking confidence in myself when I have these conversations. And I think it's important to remember that many of us have, whether we have the theoretical knowledge, whether we have the lived experience, whether our hearts and soul are in this type of work, things are constantly changing, and I will never be able to know the perspective of every single human or group on Earth. And so with that, I think it's important to always, maintain that level of humility and remember, yes, I do feel uncomfortable right now. I regularly feel uncomfortable talking to colleagues about questions because I want to make sure that they feel comfortable, but I also want to make sure that I'm doing justice to what we need to talk about. I want to make sure that we are taking the right steps and actions to make sure that even people outside of this room are going to benefit from what's happening, and especially groups that have been marginalized. Dave mentioned something interesting, how language and verbiage is so important. Language is constantly changing. When we look at earlier last year, the term BIPOC, Black, Indigenous People of Color, very, very, well used. I think it was earlier this year, maybe or maybe it was December, an article came out on how many groups who have been marginalized or equity seeking groups hate the word BIPOC. They feel that it erases their identity. Other people like to see, POC. Other people would like to use the word BIR, Black or Indigenous racialized people. Language is constantly changing. And how can you not feel afraid of making a mistake if the world is moving so fast? And I'm worried that I'm going to say the wrong thing. I mean, even today, Sarah and Curt, right at the beginning, this wasn't this is not the way that we're wanting to do it. But the ability to be able to say, thank you. Curt, the first thing Curt said was, thank you. I would be surprised if Curt couldn't say that he felt a little tickle in his stomach when she said that, because we're always going to feel uncomfortable when we think we do something wrong. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to say, okay, mental note, I apologize. I'm going to look into this and I'm going to try to do better. So you might be able to feel confident in having these conversations, but always remember that there's always that chance that we're going to say something wrong, and we have to commit to continuously trying to learn and do better as we move forward.
Oh, it's so well said. And for clarity, it was more than a tickle. So help us as individual leaders, as service leaders, if I can be bold and put that language in there. What can we do? Let's start with ourselves, because my understanding is, I need to be looking at myself in the mirror. So what advice do you have for us as individual leaders to be kind of acknowledging that fear and knowing that we want to be making change? What advice do you have for us as individuals? And then maybe we can pull it up to thinking about our organizations. But what advice do you have as individuals wanting to be a part of these conversations?
Sarah, do you want me to go first, or do you want to go?
Sure, go ahead.
I think we have to remember there's no formula. There's really no formula to how to do these things. And again, relate it back to your work, whatever it is, whatever field or sector that you're working in, there probably isn't an exact formula on how to work with individuals or groups. However, there is a lot of documentation out there that can guide your work. Information that gives you histories on different groups that have been marginalized in our community. And a lot of them have a lot of really wonderful recommendations. Like I said, we talk about the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. How many of us in this room can say that we've sat down and we've really looked at those recommendations and said, this is within my scope to do. I can actually do this within my workplace. I think very few of us, and again, I'm guilty of many of these things myself, and I think most of us are. I think when we're looking into this work, it's the first, what is within your capacity? What can you do immediately? There are probably a lot of really small wins that you can do. Finding out what territory that you're currently on. And what does that really mean when we're acknowledging the land? What does that mean in terms of our commitments to the people who are currently living in these communities, or even who are not living in this community anymore? So yeah, a lot of that reflection is so key. Yes, understanding your privileges, but also understanding the biases and the ways that we interact. It's going to be a lifelong thing. Like, you will constantly be having to look at yourself. I can look at myself, let's say, if I looked at myself 15 years ago, I was homeless, I was pregnant, I was a high school dropout, I was in a relationship with domestic violence. My lens at that time would have been very different than it is now. And having to really look at where I've come from, why am I here? Is it meritocracy or is it luck? A lot of times it is luck. And remaining with that and sitting with that and finding, using that when you interact with others, I think it's really, really important. I'll pass it to you, Sarah.
Oh, thanks,
Sarah,
Olga. No,
yeah,
I
Sarah,
just had to
jump in.
kind of give it a minute to that, to let it just
Mhm.
sit and sink,
Yeah.
because there was a lot of, really important reflection in that. Thank you, Olga, for sharing all of that with us. Yeah, I think I've always been of the mind, for me at least, that if I'm not a little nervous going into something, then I probably haven't prepared myself, or I'm too overconfident with what's going to happen. So, and it's a recipe for disaster. Then, something is, what can go wrong will go wrong. So there's nothing wrong with admitting you're a little worried or scared or nervous, and just saying that right out. We did. Just back last month, an Indigenous sharing circle on behalf of the city. And I can tell you, my nerves were frayed. I was not sure what I was going to do. Was I going to mess this up completely? Was, how, I was really, really like stressed about going into that. But it turned out to be one of the best learning experiences. And people were so open. And I've had so many follow-up meetings with that, and just people are saying that, what, you acknowledge that you made, you could make a mistake, and you're willing to learn, so we're ready to help you down that journey. And so I think it's so important for us to be okay with being a little nervous and scared, but taking the steps that we can. And what can we do to prepare? As Olga said, there's so much information out there. So, even taking that time to do the readings, to do a little bit of a Google search, to watch a couple of, videos or documentaries, dig up something on your reading list and try to make a point of listening to it or reading it. I'm thinking of my Audible app right now and how I listen to a lot of books these days. So, doing that background research and understanding. So you're not necessarily always relying on that person to teach you everything, but you have a little bit
Right.
of understanding, and a little bit, you've done
Yeah.
a bit of the legwork, because we
Mm.
do often task the same people over and over again for information and for assistance and for help. And how do we do this? And how should we do that? And can you teach us about this and that? And we, so we should be taking some of that onto ourselves and really trying to get those educational pieces in place. And so whether it's individually or for our organization, let's, find those resources and use them, and try to at least do that legwork to
Right.
put ourselves into a place before we are reaching out, on reflex to community members and saying, oh, can you teach me about this, or can you tell me about that?
Yeah.
And
Good one.
then just, I think it just really understanding that this is constantly a learning process. You will never know everything. You will never understand everything. You have to be extremely empathetic and really open-minded going into any of these situations when you're, trying to delve into something new or start something new within your organization. So there will be a learning process. You will make mistakes. To say, to be able to apologize, and to make the effort to come back from that and learn what is, what is the better way, or what is a more appropriate way of doing things. So
Right.
I think those are, important key things.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I just wanted to
Great.
add, I think that if you
Please.
are thinking of starting these conversations, a great starting point is to say, I actually don't know everything. Whenever I meet someone new, I'm always like, okay, hi, nice to meet you. I'm supervisor, so-and-so. I don't know everything, but I promise my commitment to you is that we will work together to try to find the best resources and the answers for this. And so starting the conversation doesn't need to be you coming in and centering yourself as, hey, I'm the one who wants to talk about equity. Look at me. It doesn't need to be that way. It can be a simple conversation, whether you are supervising and you're sitting with your team and you guys do your check-ins and say, hey, you know, I realize that perhaps we haven't taken the time to commit ourselves to equity work in our framework. What can we do together? Open that conversation. If you're not in a conversation or in a position of leadership, turning to your colleague and say, hey, I'm trying to commit myself to try to do better. Would you be willing to support me in this? And have people in your circle who are willing to challenge you. Having someone who can turn to you and say, actually, I don't think that's the right way to think about it is so helpful, because it really, you know, it commits you to continuous growth and continuous exploration onto how we can improve and how we can push further and further in creating places that are inclusive for everyone.
Can I jump in there and build on that and ask a question? Holly's put a great question here around how do you bring an organization into this conversation when the language changes so quickly? And maybe I think attached to that is help us understand or articulate what a culture, organizational culture looks like that is really ready to lean in. Sorry, boy. Oh, there's going to be some, oh gosh.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's all right. That's okay.
There we go. That's the learning on the fly here. How do we recognize and how would we articulate, describe a culture that is ready for these conversations? And to Holly's point, you know, knowing that things are changing so quickly. So what should we be looking for in our own cultures to say, yeah, we're ready to do this work authentically?
You want to go
I don't
first,
think
Sarah?
there's an ideal. I don't think there's an ideal place to say, oh, we are now here. I think if we keep waiting for that, we may never arrive to that, because things are constantly changing and evolving.
Yes.
So I think it's simply the mindset to say, like, we need to do something and move forward. What's the first thing we can do? You know, just take a quick scan and say, what are low-hanging fruit? You know, let's start with some learning sessions, and then, you know, maybe we could take a quick, poll or survey amongst our staff and let's find out, what backgrounds do we have in here? What resources do we have within our organization that we've never bothered to tap, because, people are kind of pushing that part of their identity away when they step into the workplace. So maybe we are just working to create a more inclusive workplace where people can be more of themselves. So it could be simple steps, but I don't think we ever should sit back and say, oh, we have to reach point, at this level before we can get to equity work, because, it's not going to happen. There's no ideal place for that.
So well said. I think you're absolutely right, Sarah. I don't think that you would ever walk into an organization and say, oh yeah, this one's ready. They're ready to face all these challenges and find out all how we've been failing all these people. Right. No one's ever going to get there, right? And I think that we still have to try and find ways within our own power. And you know what? And like, quite frankly, we're not all moving mountains within these positions. And I'm sure, Sarah and I are both new-ish to these roles, right? We're not changing structures completely and overthrowing entire, centuries of thinking. It doesn't happen that way. It's all these little movements. And someone once told me, you're basically just poking holes in a cloth. And eventually that cloth is going to get weakened and things will start to change. And so I think, yes, they might not be ready for you to bring in a very, we're going to do a huge, 5 activists coming in with $100,000 budget. People might not be ready for that, but are they ready to look at ways that we can decolonize our language? Are they ready to find ways that we can stop referring to our colleagues as ma'am or sir? Are we ready to find ways to make sure that our washrooms are inclusive of everyone? There are a lot of different ways that we can do it, and starting with something. Some people might say, well, this is just performative. Put that intention out there, find out what you can do. Is your intention pure? And then go with it. And once you've done that, it's going to blossom. You're planting a seed that will help others say, we did that last year. And you know what? We didn't collapse as an organization. I bet you we could do that. And you get more people on board and you start to move with those type of intentions.
Brilliant. I'm encouraging people to jump in. I found the chat on my phone, so I encourage people to jump into the chat if you've got some specific questions for either Sarah or Olga. While you're doing that, let's move the conversation to this idea of, and again, this is a theme you want to explore, this idea of accountability. And I think that's a natural next step, and help me here. I think that's a natural next step from this idea of starting with little, starting with meaningful, intentional ideas. And then how do we hold ourselves accountable to a bigger process? Is that, it seems like is there a connection there?
Well, do you want to go, Sarah, or?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think, you know, we've talked a lot about that self-accountability, right? That self-reflection, looking at ourselves, looking what's in our power. I mean, and even going to Holly's question about language. If we are committed to this, and that means that we're committed to willing to do the research, you know, whether it's, okay, I'm going to dedicate an hour a week to, you know, exploring this or asking questions about this or watching this video, you know, I think when we're talking about accountability, a lot of that happens to fall on us. We have to be accountable to ourselves and accountable to our commitment to doing this for a long time when it's no longer cool, when there's no longer hashtags, when we've moved on to the next thing, right? And so that accountability really has to come from us. As organizations, though, I think that you have to be, yes, I'd say step forward and do what you can. But at the end of the day, organizations do have to put this as one of their main tenants, one of the main things that they want to see as they progress forward, whether it's your strategic plan, whether it's the policy reviews, whatever it is, you have to make sure that as an organization that they're eventually going to commit. Because yes, you can continue to do the work and hope that it's going to blossom, and it eventually will. But at the end of the day, it won't be only one person who changes an organization. It's going to be the organization committing and everyone making those moves forward. So yeah, the ultimate goal, I think, really is to ingrain it in your policies, your strategies, your hiring of staff. Everything needs to eventually have that if you really are wanting to be accountable to this type of work.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. Put it in your strategic goals, your missions, your value statement, whatever it is that guides your organization. It should be right at the top in big neon flashing lights that we are committed to the equity, diversity, and inclusiveness, or we can add justice to that. It turns it into a Jedi, which people like a lot more. Becoming a Jedi. Everybody wants to be a Jedi, right? So just, yeah, making sure that when you put it right up there at the top of your guiding document for your entire organization, that's how it gets built into your policies. That's how it gets built into your programming, your service. That's how it gets built into your key performance indicators. Those things all have to be included. And if you, that's ultimately, I think, how you shift an organization towards really making sure it's more inclusive. So it's not just, you know, we hired a bunch of people who, you know, fall into different categories, but how do we keep them? How do we retain them? How do we educate the staff that we have? That has to come right from the top, right from your strategic goals. So I think putting those in bold, flashy neon, whatever you have to do to get them right up at the top and build that from there, because that's what guides. And make sure you continue to hold it as a guiding value, a North Star, however you want to refer to it, but it should be right up at the top to build your organizations.
Yep. And again, I encourage people to jump into the chat. I'm asking a lot of questions here. I want to hear yours if you've got some specific questions, either at a strategic level or a more tactical piece. I know that Sarah and Olga will be happy to answer those questions. Maybe just building on that and maybe getting into the weeds a little bit, Sarah, and this, well, to you both, you know, what are some practical steps that you can share and maybe some learnings you have from your own experience at the City of Cambridge and Guelph in building out some of those policies and strategies? What have been your learnings so far in your good work that you can share with us to help us guide our similar conversations in our organizations?
You want to go first, Sarah?
Yeah, okay, I can take that first. I think, my goodness, there has to be, I think I've seen a commitment. People want to do stuff. Again, there's that fear to overcome. So just being supportive within the organization, and saying, I'm here to help without judgment. I'm learning, you're learning, we're all learning this together, and we're going forward. It has been, very helpful.
I would,
Olga, go for it.
I'll build on that. I
I'm
think,
lost.
yeah, no, I'll build on that. I think that one of the key things to do is don't work in a silo, right? And I'm sure we always hear that we're all in silos, and a lot of us are, but finding those people in your organization who are aligned with this type of work. And the hope is, if you're all working in nonprofits, that we are all aligned in making the world better. How are we going to do it from an equity for all type of lens? And so for myself, I think it was just finding those people who were aligned with the work that we need to get done, who has the power to do it, and who knows someone who has the power to do it, who's willing to talk to me a little bit about the historical stuff that has happened, because every organization has a history, whether good or bad, and what have we learned from those situations, and how can we work towards not making those mistakes or amplifying some great work that's already been done. So yeah, taking the time to learn the history, connecting with the right people in your organization, building people who you trust and who trust you. And again, it's like that ripple effect. I'll give you an example. I connected with someone in our rec team within one of the first few weeks there. And again, rec, they're wanting to make the world better in their own ways with community connections and things like that. What a great person for me, because she'll turn to me for anything. Hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Thoughts? Let's break it down. So you know what? I actually don't have the answer for that, but let me connect you with this person. And then she's brought in another person to connect with me. Hey, they were mentioning this and that. I was wondering if you could sit with them and talk to them and how we can develop this into something bigger. It's really trying to ripple that and letting people know that you are looking from this lens, and that's something that you're wanting to commit to, and the word will start to spread. So I think that's one of the things that I've learned, and through that, it's created changes in some of the processes. It's created changes in some of the policies, because now it's on their mind. I always say, you know what, if we leave this conversation, you don't remember anything I said, just remember Olga, and then it'll hit you. Diversity, equity. Have I thought about diversity or equity? And again, you might not have the answer. I might not have the answer, but it's on your mind to think about how do we incorporate it.
Right. That's excellent. Michael's got a great question for us here in the chat. He says, all organizations now have a statement in recruitment materials around a commitment to DEI. How can they, however, develop a culture that ensures they not only talk about it, but truly demonstrate on this? And we've chatted a bit about this, but can you expand a bit on any more practical advice or tools you can be pointing us to that we should be thinking about and learning from?
I think sometimes simple actions really do have big consequences. If you are able to lead a meeting, put in a 5-minute discussion. I've heard of really great organizations that at their board meeting, they actually do a book club. And again, a book club is not going to change the world, but it's going to change some of your thoughts, and it's going to reflect in the work that you're doing. I've heard other organizations commit to listening to a podcast on their PD days and, dissecting that. And then really, once that thought's on your brain, talking about those actionable items. And sometimes, again, there's some actionable items which people would consider quick wins, but they are working towards making a better place. And so keeping it there as something that is constantly talked about, a lot of that has to come through leadership. But if you are not in a leadership position, speaking with your leaders and saying, I'd really like to incorporate this into our monthly meeting or our whatever your scrum or whatever it might be. I'd like to incorporate it. Can we put it as a standing item that we always talk about it? And if it's 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes. If it's 25 minutes, amazing. But saying that we're going to keep talking about this to the point that it just becomes second nature.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely adding that to your meetings. And I've actually seen around the city of Guelph, the corporation, there are a couple of book clubs, and they have a list of podcasts and stuff on their monthly. Our human resources puts out like a learn and grow, and so they'll put out monthly resources for all the employees to look into, and to just webinars, podcasts, book lists, all sorts of stuff that you can just access and look at to continue your personal learning. Building it in to your meetings. For me, I've been being invited to all of the monthly meetings for each department, and can you just give us an update and that kind of stuff. So making sure that you are building in that person who might be responsible for DEI into your meetings on a regular basis, keeps it top of mind. And then also to take a look around your workspace and say, hey, what can we do to make this more of a comfortable and more of a welcoming? Are we only celebrating Christmas and getting in the holiday spirit at the beginning of December? Or are there other people in our organization that maybe celebrate other things that we can be celebrating with them? And maybe you start, a old school, it would have been like a bulletin board or something in the middle, just, however it is, to say, hey, is there anybody that celebrates anything else? What can we celebrate with you? And bring that forward. Is there little things to you do? I mean, we keep an eye on things like, if we're in pre-COVID, bringing in snacks and things like that. Are we making sure, we talk about various dietary restrictions or issues, the peanut allergies and that kind of thing. So are there any religious issues, or people that are wanting certain things, that we can make sure we are expanding that? When we have social events, are we making sure we're inclusive? So little things you can start just to make that atmosphere for your staff, or for your department, a little bit more welcoming and more inclusive, and that start conversations and start people feeling more comfortable to talk about bigger steps that the organizations can be taking.
Excellent. 4 minutes left. So quick last question from John in the chat, who's asking about how can we build our resilience around this? And I think the lens there was around our individual resilience. So apologies, we've only got 3 minutes left now. So from each of you, how can we be building our individual resilience around those conversations to keep doing this good work and supporting it? Any thoughts on that?
Go for it,
Olga. Please.
I was going to say individual resilience is important, but I think it's also important to remember that resilience doesn't have to be individual. I think we should really we need to be supportive of each other. And like I said, it doesn't have to be huge things that we do. This could be little tiny things to show our support for others, and to be somebody to that they can talk to be an active listener, because we shouldn't leave people to be resilient on their own. I think we all have to form a very supportive network around each other, and support each other through this work.
That's great.
Excellent.
And I think,
Olga?
just tying it back to the work that you do. If you are in a nonprofit, what is it? What is your work? What is your mission? What is your goal? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? If you're trying to, talk about food insecurity, if you're trying to talk about volunteerism and how you're bringing volunteers into the workplace, if you're trying to work with children, there is a passion there that is trying to make something better. And thinking of it from an equity lens and putting it into, and I said this to Kim before, into your ethos. This should be part of everything that you're working towards. It should just be part of it. Just like when you go to the washroom, you wash your hands. Very rarely do you have to stop and think, wait, do I have to no, you think it's just a natural thing. And so I think when we talk about resilience, it's just remembering that this is part of who I am becoming. It's part of what I want to be as a person. And it's part of my values. And that resilience will come with that.
Awesome. We could chat for hours, weeks. In fact, we need to continue on this conversation. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, of course. So we're going to wind down the conversation here. Before we do, Karen's encourage you to look at the note that Karen put into our chat around the good work that she and her team are doing at worldreligions.ca. And there's all kinds of resources there for thinking about different holidays and incorporating and building. I think I was building on Sarah's comment as well. So I encourage you to check that out. Thanks for sharing that, Karen. That was fabulous. Can we give a round of applause to both Olga and Sara for their insights, their patience, and their grace with all of us. I want to thank you all for your patience with the technology there. I appreciate that. And Kim, thank you for steering the ship through that. Everyone, these are important conversations, and I hope that we can all walk away today feeling a little less fearful of them, and perhaps a little more confident in stepping into these conversations, knowing that that's not something we need to do individually, but do collectively as teams and as community, as organizations, and as a community. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure. We'll see you again tomorrow at noon. Hopefully the power is back on. We'll be chatting about good governance and think about next steps. And I think all our conversations this week can lead into how we're best supporting our board. So again, thanks to Kim for her technical support, and thanks to our special guests for their insights. Everyone, enjoy your afternoons, and we'll see you tomorrow. Kim and Olga, thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.